Thank you all for coming. My name's Ryan Evans. If you've been here at this conference the last day or so, you probably have heard a little too much about me, so I'm going to focus on our two fantastic guests here. We, of course, have Governor Stitt, the governor of Oklahoma, as well as Matt Michelsen, the founder and CEO of Gothams. And so I'm going to let them talk a little bit about who they are and where they come from, and then we'll get to the next generation on strengthening states and communities.
Well, hey everybody, how's everybody doing today? Awesome, awesome. I like to remind Texans that Oklahoma is a step above Texas. I got it horns down there, but anyway, I went to Oklahoma State, so go Cowboys, and yeah, there we go. I'm a little more neutral now, so Boomer Sooner and go Longhorns. Yeah, there we go. But I'm the governor of Oklahoma. Just got elected to my second term. It's just been a wonderful, wonderful experience serving my state. I'm a fourth generation Oklahoman. I was in the business world before I ran for governor. Never ran for office till 2018. I started a company with $1,000 in a computer when I was 27, and then grew that. We have over 1,000 employees today, and financial services company. A lot in mortgage business, and so I just got inspired to run for governor, and I believe that's what our founders wanted. They didn't want politics to be a profession and a career. They thought that it would be a successful farmer or rancher or business person. You'd leave that career and go serve your state or your country, and then go back to the private sector. So that's what I promised Oklahomans I would do, and it's just been an amazing story. So looking forward to the conversation today, and just honored to be here and hanging out with all the business leaders like yourself.
So I'm Matt Michelsen. I am a Silicon Valley transplant and now a Texan. I feel like, yeah, right? Yeah, no, coming to Texas has been unbelievable on so many levels. I mean, it feels like freshman year of college. And we live in Austin, and the way that we've been welcomed here, but also how business friendly it is. I mean, I made a career in Silicon Valley really being a sergeant to some of the greats. And moving here, we started a company called Gothams that did COVID response. So many of you probably used a company that we contracted called Curative. And we did COVID response in 41 states. We built a lab in Washington, D.C. for the federal government. We built a lab in Austin, Texas, and then we had one in California. But what many people don't realize is that, it seemed very magical what we were doing, and what we were doing was we actually were just using military principles of logistics to move tests around. So when we came to Texas, Texas was spending $1,000 a test, over $1,000 per COVID test. This was in March of 2020. We lowered that to $150 overnight, similar to, we looked at Silicon Valley scale. We went from 7 employees to 7,000 inside of 3 months. And the reason I say this is that, in education and all these different things is that, you can really break the mold by thinking outside the box. And, in Texas right now, I see a lot of what I saw in Silicon Valley in the 90s, and it's really welcoming to be here.
Thanks so much. Let's dwell on the topic of COVID response a little bit. With COVID, COVID, of course, isn't over, but the pandemic is functionally over, at least as far as how many of us live our lives. And actually, I live in D.C., would get tested at Curative, a little van right down the street. So I didn't know you guys were involved with that. Thank you. Governor, how did your state handle COVID response, and what lessons did you learn?
Well, I mean, tons of lessons. I guess. When it hit, it was such an unknown, and I was on calls with the president and all the other governors as we were working through what we were going to do with our state. This is kind of an interesting story. I'll go back. It was kind of the first time that shut everything down. It was the Thunder games. You remember that? The Thunder game in Oklahoma City, and I just happened to show up there. I think it was March maybe 20th of 2020. And my commerce department wanted me to come meet a business that we were recruiting that was there for the Thunder game. And so I went after work, and I brought my 12-year-old son with me. I said, hey, grab a basketball. We'll go get some signatures, and we'll come over to the game. And so we go in, and COVID, there'd been we'd heard about it, and maybe New York had a couple cases. There were 0 cases in Oklahoma. So I go to the game. It's like 6:50, and the game was tip-off was 7 p.m., and I get a phone call, and it's from my Department of Health. And the Department of Health guy was, I kind of looked out, I was in a meeting, and I thought, man, I maybe ought to get it. So I stepped away, I took the call, and he said, Governor, I got to tell you something. I said, what's that? He goes, well, we just got our first case of COVID. He said the team that came into town to play the Thunder, one of their players ended up testing positive. And I said, he goes, where are you at? I said, well, I'm at the Thunder game. And I go, who knows this? And he goes, you're the first person I've called. Nobody knows. And I'm sitting there just going, gosh. It's like literally the players are walking onto the court right now. And so I grabbed one of the front office guys. I said, go get Clay Bennett. I said, I'm telling the governor needs to meet him in his office real quick. So we ran around. They found him. We go down to the basement there at the stadium, and Clay Bennett comes in. Now it's like 7 o'clock. The tip-off is literally about to happen, and I tell Clay, I said, hey, we just got our first case of COVID. Right then, we didn't know if it was, the whole place was gonna, get infected, and so we sent the teams back to the locker room. We got the NBA commissioner on the phone. We said, what's your policy? He said, well, we don't have a policy. What's the governor's policy? And me and Clay are on the phone, and so basically he was like looking at me, and I was like, well, gosh, we probably out of abundance of caution should just call the game. And he said, okay. So we went down, we walked down there and found the general manager, and we said, okay, how are we going to do it? Let all the fans out of here in an orderly fashion. And so we went back down, and we decided just to say, hey, due to unforeseen circumstances, we're going to call the game. And so we did that. And then 5 minutes after that, the NBA season canceled. Everything, NCAA, just the whole thing kind of just started going, closing down after that. But that was kind of the hysteria. We didn't know exactly what was happening. So we closed for 2 weeks like everybody else. But ultimately, I knew that we had to get things back open. So we were one of the first states that fully reopened. So by April of that year, we were starting to reopen. June 1st, we were fully reopened in the state of Oklahoma. And I just thought it was so important that we have kids in school. There were other states that were closing things down for a couple years. And, the learning loss, now people are starting to realize that. I refused. I was one of the few governors that did not do a mask mandate statewide. I just thought it was unenforceable, and I wasn't going to make some Western Oklahoma farmer a criminal for not wearing a mask during that period of time. So we approached it a little bit different than other states. I mean, we had that first kind of month period where we kind of tried to slow things down, but ultimately we kept our state open, and I think it's proved beneficial from a freedom and a business-friendly environment to this point.
That initial part of your story is just such a great analogy for leadership in a crisis. Is you're dealing with imperfect information, you don't know what's going on, you sort of want to be overcautious at the beginning. So thanks for that story. What was your introduction to dealing with COVID as a business leader?
It's interesting because, the pandemic supposedly ended, I think May 11th was the last day federally, but the pandemic's not over. I mean, I want to see a show of hands. How many people know someone in the last 2 weeks that has had COVID or have talked to a friend? Right? I mean, the pandemic's not over. It's just, what we know about it and how we deal with it, right? So if we knew what we know now, we would have never done any of these things, right? And I have a crazy story. We actually, when we originally responded in DC, we had gone down and we found this company, and we got them a federal contract with DOD, and DOD said, come on out. So we got on an airplane, we flew out to DC, everything was closed. We landed in Andrews Air Force Base, and it was literally like Walking Dead, going through the streets of DC. We brought PCR machines, built this lab in a bus terminal, 100,000 square foot bus terminal. We had Army Corps engineers. We were taking air conditioners off Target stores. I mean, the resources that we had at our fingertips were ridiculous. The next stop on the trip was to Florida, right? And we didn't know anyone yet that had COVID, but we knew we were going to know someone. And we showed up at FDEM, which is the Florida Department of Emergency Management. And we show up in the parking lot, and literally the parking lot was filled with people. There was no one in the building. And, I said to the head of FDEM, Jared Moskowitz, who's now a congressman, I said, Jared, what's going on? He goes, there was someone with COVID in there. And I said, that's so literally I felt like I was walking into Chernobyl, right? You know, like, you know, so we went in, but where I'm going with this is that shock and awe, and really the main reason that we moved to Texas, first of all, because my wife was in the back of the room somewhere here, endorsed it. And why'd she endorse it? Because our kids weren't able to go to school. In Texas, they went to school. And, you know, did kids get COVID? Yeah, some kids got COVID. I mean, and, you know, shoot, I have 2 members of my team that haven't been around because they're in D.C. You know, we still test Congress every day. You know, I can't give you the numbers, but there's a, you know, large percentage of people testing positive, right? It's just how we deal with it. And being smart, right? I mean, if you know that someone on your team has COVID that you've been exposed to, you know, be aware, you know, maybe test yourself, and, you know, be respectful.
Matt, you meant, oh, sorry, Governor, go ahead.
I was just going to say one other thing. I mean, during those calls, when we would have briefings, I set my National Guard up, and so I had briefings every single day as we were getting the numbers in. And back then, if you remember the surges, everybody was talking about hospital capacity, and that's what really started freaking out the leaders was man, our hospitals are going to be overrun, and we were hearing all these things. My epidemiologist, it was crazy. I said, okay, I had the University of Oklahoma, I had our state epidemiologist, had Oklahoma State. I was getting all of them in the room saying, show me your predictions. They could not even agree. I told them, I said, get away. Y'all go come up with one prediction and bring it to me. And I remember they came back and they were saying, we're going to be out of capacity on, you know, April 30th. And I said, well, that's like 2 days from now. And they were like, yeah, I know. And so I could not get good data. And they couldn't even agree with the numbers. But I think the big point, that's what really was worrying most governors was our hospital capacity. So we started setting up these surge plans, et cetera, et cetera. But at the same point, I was on these conference calls, and it was just hysteria. We would have somebody would say, well, I want to limit gatherings to 250 people outdoors. And somebody else would say, no, I want to do 200 indoors. I want to do 75. No, I want to do 50. And it just started getting crazy. And so, again, you know, I don't believe you put your Constitution in the attic just because someone tells you to, or there's some kind of pandemic. We have to believe in freedoms in this country, and so that was kind of how we led in Oklahoma. And I think it's been really, really beneficial. I think we've ended up being right on it. And again, there were people. I toured hospitals. We did everything we could to provide what the schools needed, what the hospitals needed. But at the end of the day, I don't believe there's such a thing as a non-essential business, and so I refuse to say this business can't be open, this business can. I thought that was all nonsense because the only non-essential business is the one that you don't work at or you don't get your paycheck from, and et cetera.
Matt, you mentioned earlier before we started that you made a really interesting point about COVID having been a logistics problem as much or more than it was a science problem. Can you get into that?
Yeah, sure. So, you know, when COVID also happened, there weren't any COVID tests, right? And when we found this group, we thought about it. And if you listen to some of the things, and, you know, you can go on the internet and actually watch, but I've been able to learn them firsthand. So, like Elon Musk, right? He'll tell you that 4 is better than 5, 3 is better than 4, you know, 2 is better than 3. And, you know, if you look at the way that they design the car, right, they're taking pieces out of the car. Every person on that manufacturing floor is actually able to take parts and pieces out. If you look at the chassis, the way they put it together, it's actually stamped. And, you know, sometimes it's more costly to repair it, but, you know, manufacturing it, dealing with it, the supply chain becomes a lot simpler. So when we approached it, we thought about, you know, where are the bottlenecks, right? And what we realized was that actually UPS and FedEx were the largest bottlenecks. So the federal government, DOD, very rarely uses UPS or FedEx. They actually use commercial airplanes. So we created this Pony Express around the country where we'd go in these states and we'd have these tests. We'd have them gather in those Home Depot buckets, and we'd get them to the airport, and then we'd send them the night of. And one of our things was we would do it in 24 hours or less. It was free. I'm sure many of you were waiting 4, 5, 6, 7, 14 days for a COVID test. You know, people, literally the FDA, everyone came down and said, like, you guys are lying about these test results. And we said, why don't you come and watch how we do it? And what we did was we took them to the airport, we put them on the airplane, we shipped them either to Austin, Texas, Washington, D.C., or Los Angeles, California. We would get into the lab by midnight, 1 a.m., right? And we'd run the test. Backing up a little bit, we also built our own software. We also manufactured all of our testing supplies in El Segundo, California. And in this response, I mean, everyone was trying to go through these traditional supply chains, traditional ways of doing it. I mean, the things that I had learned in Silicon Valley was, look for the third door, not the front door where everyone lines up, or the side door where, governors and celebrities go through. It's that third door, right, where people are going under the building, dropping in. I mean, how you're going to get in. And that's how we really achieved it. We hired the head of logistics for JSOC, which is Joint Special Operations Command. We hired the command sergeant major from SOCOM, Delta Force. I mean, these guys, we managed it like we were going to war. And it was honestly, and from my career standpoint, I've been able to be in so many of these unicorns that you read about, but being part of that and being able to do well, doing good, has been really one of the highlights of my career.
Thank you for that. The war in Ukraine has highlighted all sorts of problems with supply chains and logistics, and COVID before that, and the pandemic, and the economic uncertainty in defense and in just the regular civilian economy. Could you talk a little bit about what's going on in the aerospace industry in your state and what policies you have to support and advance that?
Yeah, I love to say that Oklahoma, we feed the world, we fuel the world, and we defend freedoms around the world. And Oklahoma, we've got 5 big military bases, and Tinker Air Force Base is one of them. They're in Oklahoma City, and they do all the maintenance. It's the largest maintenance and repair facility in the country, in the world, because they maintain all the Air Force fleets. And so the aviation and defense industry has really spun out of kind of our military bases. So we have about 1,100 companies around that. The workforce is there, so that tends to kind of breed on its own and kind of work because of the workforce that's already there. So we've got Kratos, unmanned aircraft. We've got the FAA, their largest single site centers there. All the unmanned stuff we're working we're trying to be a leader on. I signed an MOU with the governor of Arkansas on an unmanned, kind of corridor that we can do, and then also autonomous vehicle corridor between us and Arkansas. So all those things are working together. But I do want to touch real quick on energy, because the war in Ukraine and it's really highlighted the need for a reliable, affordable energy source. And every time I'm talking to, I go to D.C. quite often and meet with ambassadors and CEOs from other countries, and this reliable, affordable energy grid is so important right now for CEOs and manufacturing, and that's why Oklahoma is really growing. So Oklahoma, our energy story is one that I've had a chance to talk to the president about, and being a leader on NGA and RGA, we get a chance to go speak on these topics. But Oklahoma is number 4 in oil production in the country. Okay, everybody knows that about our state. We're number 3 in natural gas production, but we're also number 2 in wind energy production. We've got some of the cleanest water, cleanest air in the country. We're one of only 4 states that over 45% of our energy comes from renewables. Google has their largest data facility located in Oklahoma. A lot of people like buying our mix. But man, you're not having an honest conversation if you're not talking about natural gas, and you're not talking about oil, and you're not talking about what does that look like in the future. And I was just on a panel down in Austin for the RGA as we were talking about this all of the above approach. We're also leaning into hydrogen in Oklahoma. There's blue hydrogen, green hydrogen we're developing. That's so important. But Europe right now is paying 3 times what we do in the U.S. for energy costs. Okay. Oklahoma has some of the most affordable, like 11 out of the last 15 quarters, we were the cheapest, most affordable electricity costs of any other state. So these companies are looking to move here. Germany right now is building 3 new coal plants, and they're putting back online 6 more because of what's happening with Russia and the Ukraine fight. And so it's top of mind with everyone on what does that look like for your country. The last thing I want to say on it, y'all remember back in 21, it was the polar vortex in November of Texas, Oklahoma, all the states through the Midwest, unseasonably cold weather. And I think there were some rolling blackouts in Texas. We're part of the Southwest Power Pool, so we held up. We're a net exporter. We produce 65% more energy than we consume in Oklahoma. So we weren't having that issue. But my point is, our grid is made up of 40% wind energy, 40% natural gas, a little bit of coal, less than 10% is coal generation. We've got some hydrogen. But during that cold spell, this is why you have to have a reliable base load. During that cold spell, the turbines were frozen, so wind went almost to zero. Peak demand is up, it's super cold, so everybody's using more electricity, and all of a sudden, bam, 40% of our grid goes offline because those turbines were frozen. And then natural gas, we couldn't get it out of the wellhead because natural gas we were having a hard time getting that out of the wellhead to our generation plants. So coal, which is normally like 5%, went to 55% during that 2-week period. And so I tell young people and high school kids and college kids, listen, if we wouldn't have had coal in Oklahoma, you couldn't have watched TikTok for 2 solid weeks. And it's funny, but it's also a reminder that when you turn your electricity on, your light switch, you plug in your Tesla, you plug in your cell phone, that generation comes from somewhere. And we have to have an honest conversation in this country about a reliable, affordable source and what does a base load generation look like to support the needs of Americans. Because we have to have that conversation. We need to be selling to our friends and not buying from our enemies. And we have to have those conversations right now.
That's a great answer. And yet Germany is also inexplicably shutting off their nuclear power plants while they're doing all this.
That's exactly right. They're shutting down their nukes.
Before I go on to the next topic, when you make an incursion into Texas, do you notify the governor? Is there some sort of deconfliction mechanism or a hotline?
I was just with Abbott at the governor's mansion, and he was giving us an update on the border, which is just a crisis. We got to talk about that too. But the other governors, there's 10 governors down there with him as he was briefing us on what's happening and asking for some assistance, because Texas, they're spending $4.5 billion to support the border over the next 2 years, and he said he's already spent $4.5 billion, and this is clearly a federal responsibility.
Matt, what does emergency response look like, having learned all these lessons from COVID going forward, not just for Gothams? I'm curious if you're going to repurpose those great logistics networks that you built, but just more broadly, emergency response.
So more broadly, and I didn't know what emergency response, emergency management was 3 years ago. And when we built out this large network, we were looking at how we were going to address it. And the governor actually had called us one day, and they were having Operation Lone Star, and they needed someone to respond. And he makes a joke. He said, I knew you could bring us from desert to Disneyland in a very short amount of time. It's not only just building a building; it's actually staffing it, getting people so you know who's on first, who's going there. I don't envy the current administration in terms of how they're having to deal with it. I think they last night at like 1:30 in the morning pushed through the new border policy. But in relation to emergency response, I mean, it's been very interesting entering a business where some of our competitors, have been there for 20, 30 years. And we come at it from this whole military planning, execution, and financing standpoint. We're really changing and, having the cost of a lot of these things, whether we're building a base camp for fire response or we're handing out water after a hurricane in Florida. I mean, I guess you could look at it as like a Swiss Army knife, right? I mean, we never know what the emergency.
I just want to put in a quick plug for my friends at Team Rubicon. It's a charity that gets veterans, military veterans, to respond to emergencies in the United States, but also in other places as well. And they bring that teamwork and camaraderie and culture of planning to emergency response, which I just think is terrific. Can I get you on the record, Governor, about if you're going to enact your own TikTok ban, since you just brought up, you brought it up.
Yeah, well, here's the deal. I've already banned TikTok for state phones, okay? So state phones, because that was an easy for me because they need to be working anyway. If I'm going to, they're on state time, they should be working, not watching TikTok anyway. So I haven't banned it for my kids' phones yet, but I probably should do that. My wife's right here, so Sarah, we need to do that for our kids for sure.
That's great. Well, I'd love to talk also about workforce development. That's a big part of what the mission movement in this conference is all about, is the centrality of human capital. Could you talk a little bit, Matt, about some of the efforts that you're involved in on the Gotham side?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think it would be better to talk about actually the state of Texas and what's happening here. I can't speak to Oklahoma. I'm sure the governor can speak to that. But, if you look at the state of Texas right now and you actually go back in history, and, this is from people that think at like 50,000 feet that I've been able to learn from. You go back all the way to like China, then you go to Constantinople, then you come out throughout Europe, like the Golden Empire, the Portugal, Spain, London, Belgium. You can follow these money centers throughout history. And I'd like to ask, when the money center first came to the United States, can anyone tell me where the money center was here in the United States? Excuse me? Philadelphia? Nope. No, the money center was actually in the Ohio River Valley, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Right? So there you go. There's a Pittsburgh. So if you look at early 1900s, 40% of the world's wealth was in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. The Carnegies, the Mellons, all the industrial revolution, right? And if you follow that forward, right, you're going to see it, moving to like New York, then England. And as you study it more, the Industrial Revolution started to fall off. And if you look at cities at like the top of their golden age, Pittsburgh was a horrible place to live. It was filthy, homelessness. So.
He's nodding. He's cool.
So then there were over 1 million people that lived in Pittsburgh. The turn of the century, and then it went down in 1990. I think there were 100,000 people that lived in Pittsburgh. And they have these foundations and things that actually carried Pittsburgh through. So today, I think they're approaching 500,000 people in Pittsburgh from 1990 to today. But anyways, then it went to New York. And in the early 1990s or late 80s, you saw New York, and then there's a crash in the economy. The early 1990s, it actually left the United States and London for 2 years. Can anyone tell me where it went? Japan. Okay, so you had this massive industrialization occurring. The way the Japanese developed cars, televisions, all that, and they blew that up by going and buying the world and borrowing a lot of money. And so it actually came back and was pretty supplanted in New York. And then if you look at it further, it started to move to the Pacific Northwest, right? Think about it. This is huge growth of wealth, right? Seattle, San Francisco, right? Well, if you fast forward to today, in Texas, in the last 4 or 5 years, there's more Fortune 500 companies that are now in Texas than any other state in the country. There's a $3.8 billion a month surplus. Now you need to go back to Silicon Valley for like 1990s and look at the infrastructure to compare it to today. So what us as Texans really need to start thinking about is how do we protect Texas from becoming Silicon Valley, right? So, politically, socially, everything, right? It's a huge concern that we should all be thinking about right now as we deploy this and as we're doing it. Samsung, you name the company. There's one county actually in Williamson County, just north of Austin, that we're doing a little development there. And that county alone has a $500 billion in economic development slated for the next 7 years. So if you think of these numbers and you think of how that occurs, we're all very fortunate to be here, and what we do and how we do it and how we participate will be the end result of where we go.
Governor, could you speak to workforce development in Oklahoma and what you're working on there?
Yeah, well, he took us from China to all the way to Texas. Well, the puck is heading to Oklahoma, so just all right. So.
Hey, come on! I told you I was thinking about buying a place there.
That's right. That's right. But every time CEOs, manufacturing people are looking and coming and talking to our commerce department, they're always talking workforce and energy, right? Can we get the power? Can we get the energy? What's it cost? These big manufacturing big facilities, they're heavy users. And then so from the workforce standpoint, I believe it's an alignment issue. We have to get higher ed, common ed, career tech aligned with industry better. And I'll give you a couple different examples, but higher ed does not think like business people. So when I first came into governor, it was 2019, and all the hospitals they were coming to meet me, and Governor, we need more nurses. We're short on nurses. We need more RNs. I'm like, okay. So I go talk to the University of Oklahoma Health Science Center and go talk to our different nursing colleges. I'm saying, how many nurses are you producing? So OU tells me, well, we're producing 250 a year. I'm like, okay, how can we get that up? How many applications do you have? And they go, well, we get about 500 applications in a year. but we only have room for 250. I said, hang on. So you have 500 people that are willing to do the work, that want to be nurses, that can pay, and you're turning them down. And they're like, yeah, it's faculty to, student ratio. I'm like, what's that mean? Well, you just don't understand. We got to have, I said, like, hey, put a couple extra desks in there, right? Let's kick these nurses out. We had a press conference 6 months ago at the University of Oklahoma Health Science Center. They had 550 nursing applicants last year, and yet guess how many we accepted the nursing school? 550, okay? I was super pumped. Because that's just pushing on those folks and having them think differently. To them, they get no benefit. It's not a private sector. They don't get any benefit from. To them, it just looks like more work to take more people in. So you have to push, and you have to ask those questions. Then you take career techs. When I meet with German folks, Switzerland, they do such a better job than we do in the U.S. of getting kids into internships, career techs, get them into different trades. And in Oklahoma, I don't know what it is in Texas, but probably pretty similar. I think 52% of our kids go to higher ed. The rest of them don't. Well, over the last 30 years, we've kind of poo-pooed those kids that aren't going and getting a college degree. But there are so many great jobs out there for those kids coming out of career tech. So, for example, American Airlines, back to the aerospace industry, American Airlines has the largest maintenance and repair facility on the commercial side in Tulsa, Oklahoma. They have 5,000 employees. A lot of them are A&P mechanics, which is your aviation mechanics. And their executives come meet with me and they say, Governor, we need more A&P mechanics. We can hire more. Tinker needs more. Our starting salary is $70,000 a year, okay? I went home and told my high school son, I said, you're going to become an A&P mechanic. So I set up in Norman, Oklahoma, where I went to high school, I set up a special high school. It is when you're a junior in high school, if you want to be an A&P mechanic, you start going here as a junior, and by the time you graduate, you're an A&P mechanic. So I've changed the philosophy and the culture that says, hey, when you graduate from high school, I want every kid in Oklahoma either career ready or college ready. And so those are the things we have to start rethinking about. Also, Grand Lake is if you're from around here, it's in the northeast part of our state. It's a great community. People come from all over and have second homes. I also tell high school kids, I said, okay, because we all know who Grand Lake. I said, you know the biggest boats on Grand Lake? You know who owns those? It's not the doctors or the lawyers. It's the plumbing contractors, the electrical contractors, the roofing contractors. There's so many great careers out there that, God uniquely designs everybody differently. I have 6 children. And so we need to make sure we're thinking about getting every kid into the right pathway and the right career and exposing them to all the options that are out there. Instead of if you're not good at math or science or you're not the top in your high school and you think that maybe there's not a great career for you. So we got to rethink that and get them aligned to train for the workforce of tomorrow.
I agree with that, and there's been 2 presidents from different parties in the last 20 years that have come out and said they're going to support policies like that, but then when they get into office, it doesn't seem to go anywhere. So it's great to hear it happening at the state level. So you just named 2 professional development pipelines that you've disrupted in Oklahoma. What's next on your target list?
Well, there's still more to do. I mean, in the career tech space, we want to have merit-based pay. I mean, we want to kind of think about, basically on the career tech side, what is their income potential a year after they graduate? How do we start incentivizing those professors to kind of follow the kids' careers? Everything in government is more, it feels more unionized, and it feels more, we've got to pay everybody exactly the same on levels, and we want to kind of get away from that. Also, I'm putting together, I'm working on legislation. My session ends this Friday, but legislation on aligning the workforce and having one person in charge is super fractured right now in Oklahoma, and I need to have one person that can work with businesses to start laying those career paths or start talking to the higher ed, career techs, common eds to get them ready for the workforce of tomorrow. Technology, so it's pretty simple. What jobs are coming? We need to train that workforce.
That's great. I haven't seen any of the other moderators do this, but I haven't been told that I'm not allowed to, so I'd like to spend the last few minutes taking a few questions from the audience, starting with you.
Yeah, so it's an interesting point, and you know, other states have their career techs underneath higher ed, so they have accreditation kind of in there. Our state is different. Some of this is constitutional, and it's so difficult to make change. I have to go back to a vote of the people to change that. And in government, everything is so siloed, and so anytime I try to make change, you know, they don't want to be part of this organization. So we do need to, South Carolina is a model that I watch and look at because their career techs are aligned more with higher ed on the accreditation side. One thing we're trying to do is pathways. Rose State College is right across from Tinker Air Force Base, and it's a 2-year university. And so we're trying to partner with them, the career techs, to get a 2-year degree, get them into working as an associate type engineering at, you know, Boeing. They're always looking for these 2-year engineers, but also creating pathways to go get your bachelor's degree, go get your master's, et cetera. So again, it's just working together. The first structure was to get my workforce kind of aligned and all my education under one person that can kind of ride herd over that. But it's challenging in government. And I also have 150 people in the legislature that think they know what's best for the state. It'd be like if you were in business with 150 of your crazy uncles, okay? That's what it's like as governor, all right?
Next question.
You know, the thing that I would say on here's the deal: both parties have kind of been driven to their corners a little bit and not have an honest conversation. So we have to have immigration reform. We need to have legal immigration. 12% of Oklahoma's population is Hispanic. Fantastic workforce, very entrepreneurial, hardworking. I believe they're God-fearing, family-oriented. But at the same time, we have to have strong, secure borders. We have to know who's coming through our borders. You know, the fentanyl deaths have gone up 735% in Oklahoma just over the last 4 years. The federal government, I was just down there with Abbott, and literally, Abbott's plan before was to, you know, catch and then turn over to the Border Patrol folks, but then they're just released into the United States. And so now they've switched it to, hey, we're going to put up razor wire, we're going to keep people from coming in. But the one policy change that we need to happen as Americans that wouldn't cost us anything was just the Remain in Mexico policy that Trump had in place, because that is creating this mass migration. Biden canceled that day one in office, and so now as soon as you touch or ask for asylum in the U.S., you get a piece of paper that says come back to court in 2 years, but you get released to the U.S. Illinois is paying about $1 billion a year for illegal immigration health care right now, and they're not going to be able to afford that. You can see what's happening. So we have to have strong borders, but I also believe we need immigration policy for our workforce. We need to have good legal immigration as well.
Matt, do you want to jump in on that?
Sure. So, you know, fentanyl was something that came up, and I actually didn't truly understand the fentanyl crisis until I started talking with folks and learning about it. And, you know, fentanyl is not a drug that, you know, many people go and they look to actually do, like they're going to drink a beer or smoke some marijuana. And, like, I don't know how many of you are aware of this, but it's a crazy problem. It's coming through the border through China and then ended up through our border. And, you know, I was with the governor of, I think I was with actually Iowa. She said that, you know, they've seized enough of this fentanyl that could kill the entire population of their state 4 times over in the past month, right? So it's a pretty big problem that we're not aware of. I wasn't aware of it at all. So, I mean, I think that brings to light, you know, why we need border security.
And the other thing that I just learned when I was down in Austin at the briefing, you know, these aren't folks just coming here to say, hey, I want a better life. And a lot of times I'm a hard worker. I'm from Mexico. These are all over the world. Matter of fact, they said in this last month alone, they've apprehended 16 people on the terrorist list. Okay, 16 in the last month. put that in comparison, they apprehended 16 in the whole Trump administration over the last 4 years was the number below 16 on the terrorist list as well. So it is a serious problem.
Well, it's a sobering point on which to end the panel. I'm afraid we're out of time, but thank you all. Oh, Michael?
So we're going to do an audible. So here's the audible. So we were going to go across the hall to the auditorium to hear Governor Stitt do the closing remarks. Instead, what I'd like to get everybody here, get a seat. If you've got to leave, that's fine. But people will be coming in here. But I think it's just better than traipsing everybody across the hall. Just does that make sense? Everybody good with that? Okay. So everybody get my hand. So you guys standing up there, find a seat. We'll let the people outside come in. People can stand with you. I think it's a better way to go. Good job. Thank you. Yeah, if you want to.